Hello, this is an estate and gift tax online module. We are talking about the gift tax now, and I am Professor Donna Byrne. So let's get started. In this part of the module, we will be defining the term gift for gift tax purposes. We'll distinguish this definition from the ones for contracts and for the income tax, and we will explain what kind of consideration counts to make something not a gift. Okay, so first of all, think back to contracts, and I think everybody watching this will have had contracts. What was it that made something a gift? It was just the absence of consideration, right? No consideration, no contract, just a gift if you transfer something. For income tax, remember what it was for income tax? Right, donor's intent. Now, if you haven't had income tax, I'll explain this in another slide or two. For the gift tax, our test is going to be that you're getting less than adequate and full consideration in money or money's worth. And we will expand on what that means. Now, remember the income tax. Duberstein and Berman were business buddies. They got to know each other pretty well. I think they even went to baseball games together. And Duberstein was able to refer people to Berman for business purposes. Berman was grateful. He liked Duberstein. And so, in 1951, Berman gave Duberstein a Cadillac. What a guy! Now, of course, Duberstein already had a Cadillac. He didn't need a Cadillac. This was not a bargained for Cadillac. So was it a gift for income tax purposes, or was this some kind of business payment? Right? This was not bargained for. It wasn't consideration in that sense. It was kind of a thank you for, referring all the business. But the court said a gift comes from detached and disinterested generosity that proceeds from respect, admiration, or similar emotion. And because this came from a business context, that wasn't really Berman's motivation. It wasn't detached and disinterested generosity. How do we know? Well, we looked at all the circumstances, and one of the circumstances was that Berman's company had deducted the car. So the point was that it's Berman's intent that matters, the donor's intent, for purposes of determining whether we have a gift for income tax purposes. And so in this case, this was not a gift, it was income to Duberstein, right? Even though there was no consideration. Now, our test is a little bit different for the gift tax. So we're going to focus first on the concept of consideration for the gift tax. And that takes us back to 1939, a year which had many, many weddings, but two in particular on which we'll focus. Both of these involved prenuptial agreements. In both cases, the husband or husband-to-be transferred stock to his new bride. And the tax cases, went all the way to the Supreme Court. The court heard these cases together as partner cases, and I thought this was kind of cool. A woman named Helen Carlos argued for the government. She was the first woman lawyer to argue in all of the circuits, and she won both cases. And it gave us a clearer understanding of consideration for gift tax purposes. Okay, the brides. Here's the first one. Her name is Ellen Stokes Moore. The problem was she was a widow. She was a widow with a child, and her husband had left money in trust to take care of her and her son. It was for as long as she lived or until she remarried. So in other words, if she remarried, she would lose about $5,000 a month in 1939. Now that's a pickle, because she really likes Will Wemyss. Notice we pronounce it Wemyss. It goes back to some Scottish earl or something. Here's a picture of Will and Ellen Wemyss sometime after they were married. The other bride, Quinta Desmare, I might be saying that wrong. She was a showgirl from New Orleans. She did manage, however, to travel. This is a picture of her after she's just come off the Queen Mary. She's wearing a fur coat. And there were other notable luminaries on the Queen Mary. She was just also traveled, basically. And when they took this picture, she refused to comment on her rumored engagement to Charlie Merrill, who was actually still married at the time. Here's the Queen Mary. Big boat, permanently docked in Long Beach. You can go on it, walk around. Okay, the grooms. The first one, Will Wemyss, founded a shoe company with a friend of his. Originally they called it Jarman Shoe, and then when the friend's son took over, they renamed it General Shoe Company, or Genesco. It's on the S&P 500 list. It did very well. And you might even recognize some of its brands. You can Google it. They own Lids, the baseball hat store, Dockers, some shoe company called Shoe, and Johnston and Murphy. I think they have a store at the mall. Okay, his problem. He was also a widower with 2 kids. He really likes Ellen Stokes more. She's a widow. She has a son. They're kind of in the same boat. Seems great. But she'll lose all that income if she marries him. So he will give her stock to make her whole, $150,000 worth of General Shoe Company stock in 1939. And so they made a contract to that effect. She marries him, he gives her stock. The other groom, Charlie Merrill, founded Merrill Lynch with his buddy Lynch. Now, there's intentionally no comma there. There's some fun history to that, but that's really beyond our scope. He's been married twice already. In fact, he's still married to the second wife. He had 2 children with his first wife, Eliza Church Merrill, and their daughter, Doris Merrill, married Robert McGowan, who became eventually the head executive of Safeway stores, right? Did well. Charlie Merrill also had a son with his second wife, the one he's still married to, when our story opens, who actually became a Pulitzer Prize-winning poet. Now, Charlie Merrill's problem, besides still being married and feeling like he needs a different wife at this point, he is 52 or 53 already. His company has been going for some time. He's amassed quite a fortune. And so when he dies, that should not all go to his new wife, right? That makes sense. Prenuptial agreements aren't just about divorce. They're also about estate planning. And when people marry later in life, as Charlie Merrill did, it makes a lot of sense to have a prenuptial agreement. So that's what they did. He agreed to give her stock, but she would give up her right to any part of his estate. Right? That's like the elective share, if you remember that from estates and trusts, or dower, whatever they still had at that point. So they made a contract to this effect. He put the trust in the stock in trust for her and for any of their surviving offspring, and she agreed not to claim any part of his estate upon divorce or his death. They both got married, 2 weddings. The Wemyss marriage seems to have gone well. He had just bought a plantation, and she loved the idea of rehabbing old stuff, so they renovated the Fairview Plantation Mansion and lived in it for a very long time. It's now a golf club, a golf course clubhouse. The Merrill marriage, Charlie Merrill and third wife Kinta, lasted about 13 years. They did not have children. So remember, she bargained for stuff in trust for her and her kids, but she didn't have any, at least not with him. I don't think she had any. And by the time they got divorced, because they did, 3 divorces for Charlie, he was alleging that she was spending extravagantly, and he had had some heart attacks, and that kind of put a damper on their lifestyle, and she didn't take care of him adequately, apparently. So when he died, they got divorced. He died about 4 years later of complications from his heart problems. And the New York Times, as they often do, wrote quite an obituary about him because he was a notable person. It did not even mention her. It did talk about the other 2 wives, but didn't even mention Kinta. But who cares? This is really not why we're here. This is just the fun, gossipy part. We don't care about that. But tax does happen to real people, so I kind of like to throw this in because we tend to forget that. What we really care about is, were those stock transfers gifts for purposes of the gift tax? Now, remember, Will Weems transferred stock because his fiancée stood to lose her trust income, and Charlie Merrill transferred stock because he had substantial wealth and she should not claim it if he died. So, oh yeah, here's my slide on Helen Carlos. There were women attorneys in 1939. As I mentioned, she was the first to argue in all of the circuits, and she argued both of these cases. She won them, and I would love to get a picture of her. So if anybody gets a picture of Helen Carlos, I would like to see it. Okay, so first of all, is marriage enough consideration to support a contract? Yes, 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 yes. So once Mrs. Moore marries Will Weems, she would be able to go to court to compel him to give her the stock that he had promised. Right? So that is consideration from a contract's perspective. That means it's enforceable. But is this consideration in money or money's worth? That's our question. The tax court didn't think so, but the circuit court did. So right minds disagreed on this. The circuit court thought that this was an arm's length bargain, and it lacked any donative intent, and so it was not a gift. Really? Do you believe that? No donative intent? This is the woman he wants to spend his life with? Well, it doesn't even matter, because that's not the test. And the tax court didn't think this was arm's length. This is not the ordinary course of business. This is somebody you want a lot closer than arm's length. Yeah. And the tax court had focused on the idea that the consideration has to actually benefit the donor, right? In other words, had to come back and benefit Weems in some way. Because the transfer taxes are really aimed at transfers that are withdrawn from the donor's estate. And that nailed it. That is the right argument. That wins the day in both cases. Now, what about Charlie Merrill's case, right? Marriage was consideration, but he had a little bit more going here because she was also giving up part of his estate, and that had a dollar value. We could put a dollar value based on his age and how much we thought his estate might be. So maybe that's better. It seems different because she would have been getting something and now she's not. But is it really different? Under the estate tax, it was already clear that relinquishing marital property rights is not consideration in money or money's worth. But this is the first gift tax case to think about this. And the court says these two taxes are in pari materia. They should be construed together. It should mean the same thing because the whole point of the gift tax is to support the estate tax. And it actually really makes sense because all of his wealth is part of his estate when he dies, and we tax that, and then we distribute it to beneficiaries. And one of those beneficiaries was his wife. So if he transfers stock to her now, he makes his estate smaller. What she's giving him in return does not replenish his estate in any way. It doesn't make it bigger. It doesn't even keep it the same if he takes stock out to give to her. She's just not going to be on the distribution list later on. Now, one point that might help, sometimes people are sitting there going, wait, but there was no marital deduction yet. So we did actually add up the gross estate, deduct some expenses, and pay the tax, and then distribute it, including to spouse. Spouses really were not any different from other devisees or heirs, just like same-sex spouses until very recently. We're not treated any different from any other distributees under the estate tax. Right? So no marital deduction, so if that helps, it kind of makes sense. All right, so the takeaway is that the consideration in money or money's worth should replenish the estate for whatever it is the donor is transferring. So if the transfer depletes the estate, then it is a gift. On the other hand, if there's consideration coming back that kind of restores the value, then it's not. Does that make sense? Now, there are some exceptions, and they'll be in the next video. And that's the end of this one. Thank you for watching. Yes, that's Bruiser. We'll